Chapter 18. Something Very Unexpected. They were in a real jam, Bob thought glumly. Just about the worst jam they could have got into. Jupiter had guessed correctly that the armoured car money was hidden on Skeleton Island. But he hadn't guessed that Tom Faraday was in with the men who had stolen it. And he hadn't figured that the Ballingers would be coming to get it tonight because of the big treasure hunt the next day. Bob wouldn't let himself think of what would happen next. He lay still and listened to the tiny ripples of water breaking against the stern of the motorboat. Then a bigger ripple made the boat bob up and down a bit. Bob opened his eyes and saw a dark figure slipping on board over the stern. The figure was crouched down so that Tom Faraday on shore could not see him. He started crawling carefully past the engine towards the two boys. For a moment all Bob could hear was the sound of breathing. Then a low whisper reached his ears. "Hi," it said. "Don't be afraid. It's just me, Chris." Chris? How in the world could Chris be here? Chris was in jail. "I untie you," Chris whispered in his ears. "You hold very still." Bob could feel Chris working at the fishing line that was wound round him, then at the strips of shirt that tied his wrists and gagged him. It seemed like hours that the Greek boy struggled with Bill Ballinger's knots, but then he was free, cautiously stretching his cramped arms and legs. "Chris," he started to whisper. "Shh," the Greek boy hushed him. "Slip back to stern. Be ready to slide into water. I get Pete free." On hands and knees, Bob crawled to the stern. He wrenched off his sneakers. If they had to swim, he didn't want anything weighing him down. A few moments later, making hardly a sound, Pete and Chris joined him. "Over the stern," Chris whispered. "Hold on to rudder." There were about 1,000,000 questions Bob wanted to ask, but they would have to wait. He eased himself down into the water, followed by Pete. "Gosh," Pete gasped in his ear. "Where did he come from?" "I don't know, but I'm sure glad he came," Bob whispered back fervently. Chris slid like an eel into the dark water. "Now we swim," he said. "If you swim on your side, make no splash. Follow me." Without a ripple he moved away, following the shoreline. Bob swam after him, wishing he had taken off his trousers and jacket as well as his sneakers. They swam silently, their heads close to the dark water. After about 10 minutes, they rounded a tiny point of land and were out of sight of the boat and Tom Faraday. Now Chris led them ashore. They followed him to a spot where the scrub trees came down near the water. Chris got down low and wriggled up until he could peer between two boulders. Following his lead, Pete and Bob found they could see, very dimly, the shape of the motorboat about 300 feet away. "Now we can talk if we keep voices low," Chris said. "They do not find us here." "How did you get here?" both boys asked together. Chris chuckled. In whispers he told them. Chief Nostogen had returned to the jail that afternoon pretty well convinced of Chris's innocence. He had managed to find the judge, and the judge had set $50 bail for Chris, which Chief Nostogen himself had put up. Then, after giving Chris a good dinner, he turned him loose. "I go home," Chris said. "I find my father pretty good. Neighbor lady looks after him. But I start to think, how does my knife get at scene of robbery on island? Somebody put it there. That's how, after I lose it. But where did I lose it? Then I think, I must have lost it in front of the cave yesterday when I had fun with you. Only person around to find it is Tom Faraday. I think Tom Faraday finds my knife and plants it at scene of robbery to make me look like a thief. Tom Faraday is up to something. I decide to watch Tom Faraday. Bought a boat from friend of my father's and row out after dark very quiet." Chris had watched Tom Faraday set out on his nightly patrol of the island, and had seen him stop where the motorboat was now beached, and flash his flashlight 3 times. The Ballinger brothers had paddled their boat in and come ashore. Then the noise of Pete and Bob rowing to the island had reached them. "You do not row so good, Pete," Chris chuckled. "Make a splash. Ballinger fellows hide. Tom Faraday meets you and leads you into trap. I do not know what to do. Maybe I should go to camp, get men, but I think, suppose they do not believe me. Suppose they think I'm back to steal some more. Maybe I better stick around, see if I can help you. I see you put in boat and Ballingers go up to cave. I slip into the water, come and untie you. Now we watch the fun." "You were great, Chris," Pete said. "But what do you mean, watch the fun?" "Shh, Ballinger's come back. Watch," Chris whispered. Dimly they could see the dark shapes of the Ballinger brothers join Tom Faraday. Each of them carried 2 big sacks across his shoulders. "Everything all right?" Bill Ballinger asked, his voice coming clearly across the water. "Everything's fine," Tom Faraday answered. "Listen, I want my share of the money now." "You'll get it when we're ready," the other men growled. "Come on, Bill, dump the cash in the boat and let's get going." They shoved past the guard and dumped their sacks into the beach motorboat. "The kids! They're gone!" Bill Ballinger shouted. "Tom, you cut them loose." "I did not," the guard answered angrily. "They can't be gone." He flashed his light into the boat and saw the fishing line that had bound Pete and Bob. "They are gone," he said, sounding bewildered. "But they couldn't be. Not right under my nose." "They're gone, and we're getting out of here," Jim Ballinger growled. "Get in, Bill." "But what about me?" Tom Faraday objected. "For 10 years I've been waiting for my share of the money. 10 years! Even if I got all of it, it wouldn't pay me for the arm you crippled. And besides, if those kids are free, they'll blab and I'll go to jail." "That's your problem," Jim Ballinger retorted brutally. "There's a tramp freighter waiting for us and it's sailing for South America. Shove off, Bill." Bill Ballinger pushed the motorboat out into the water and hopped on board. Jim Ballinger pressed the starter button. The starter whirred, but the motor did not catch. He tried again, but nothing happened. "The motor!" Jim Ballinger exclaimed, a note of fear in his voice. "It won't start! Tom, what did you do to the motor?" "Not a thing," called back the guard. "But I'm glad it conked out. I only wish I could get my hands on you." "Keep trying, Jim," the other Ballinger urged. "We've got to get going. We have to get out of here." Again and again they pressed the starter, but the motor refused to catch. Chris chuckled with merriment. "I pull wires off spark plugs," he said. "I fix them. They will not go any place. Now we go get men from camp and they take care of these fellows." But before the 3 boys could move, they heard the sound of motors roaring towards the island. 2 boats came racing towards them, searchlights stabbing through the darkness. The Ballingers acted with panicky speed. Using oars as paddles, they moved the motorboat close to the shore. They leaped out and started running directly towards the hidden boys. Chris stood up. "We stopped them!" he yelled excitedly. "They do not get away!" Chris picked up a length of driftwood and scrambled behind a big rock. As the first of the fleeing criminals came opposite him, Chris thrust out the stick and Jim Ballinger went sprawling on the beach. Bill Ballinger tripped over him and fell too. Chris pounced on them like a small whirlwind. "You get me put in jail!" he shouted. "You make people think I am thief! I show you!" He wrapped his arms round Jim Ballinger, preventing him from rising. Bill Ballinger hauled Chris off and threw him to one side. He fell against Bob and Pete, who were just coming to his aid. But as the 3 boys sprawled on the ground, another element entered the fight. Tom Faraday came charging up and hurled himself at the 2 Ballingers. All 3 went down in a furiously fighting mass. "Cheat me out of my share, will you?" the guard was shouting. "Leave me to face the music alone." Despite his disabled arm, Tom Faraday was as strong as a bull. The Ballingers could not get away from him. The 3 men rolled down the beach and into the water with a great splash. After a few moments of frenzied struggle, Tom Faraday had forced the Ballingers' heads beneath the water. They went limp. "Let them up!" a voice roared. "You'll drown them!" The boys had been so engrossed in the fight they had not seen the 2 boats run up on the beach a few feet away. Several men leaped ashore. Chief of Police Nostigen played the beam of a powerful flashlight on the 3 men in the water. In his other hand he held a revolver. "Let them up, Tom, you hear me?" he shouted again. But the guard seemed intent on drowning his 2 accomplices. It took 4 men to pull him loose from Bill and Jim Ballinger, who were hauled out of the water gasping weakly for breath. When all 3 men had been handcuffed, Chief Nostigen flashed his light round and saw Chris, Pete and Bob. "Well, you boys are all right. Praises be," Chief Nostigen said. "But Chris, how the dickens do you happen to be here?" "He saved us and kept the Ballingers from escaping, Chief," Bob said quickly. "But golly, how did you get here? Did you guess the Ballingers would be coming after their hidden money tonight?" "I'm afraid not," Chief Nostigen said. "I never dreamed they'd stashed away their hold-up loot on Skeleton Island. You can thank your friend Jupiter Jones. He came down to the police station about 40 minutes ago with a wild tale about hidden money and the Ballingers probably going after it tonight because tomorrow would be too late. I don't know why I listened to him, but I did. Rounded up some men and came out here, and by gosh, he was absolutely right." He turned. "Jupiter, where are you? Here are your friends, safe and sound." Jupiter climbed out of the motorboat onto the shore. He came trudging towards them. "It was stupid of me to send you out here without stopping to think that the Ballingers would be coming for the money tonight," he said. "It didn't occur to me until half an hour later. Then I went to get the chief." "But you did think of it," Pete said loyally. "That's what counts." "You'd have thought of it sooner if you didn't have a cold," Bob added. "Colds always slow a fellow down." Jupe began. Achoo!" "There's enough credit for everybody," Chief Nostigen said firmly. "Between the four of you, you've solved the secret of Skeleton Island, recovered the stolen money, and got the criminals captured. That's not a bad night's work. Now you can leave the rest up to us. It's time you all got back to the mainland and into bed." Jupiter let out another great sneeze. It sounded as if he agreed.